Welcome to a new video of the Omnis on-demand training series, Omnis Studio Web Development Basics. Today, it's all about variables, or rather, about their scopes. As already announced in the previous video, we will take a closer look at the variables in Omnis Studio in the following videos, or rather, in this and the next video. Today, we will look at the variable scopes, and in the next part at the variable types. Okay, so variable scopes. What does that even mean? In Omnis Studio, scopes specify the validity range of a variable. So, when does the definition become a living variable? How long does it remain alive and retain its assigned value? And who or from where can this value be accessed? So far, so good. Where can you now create this definition and what scopes are there? I have prepared a new library for this. Don't get confused. I only created it specifically for this video so that I can explain this topic a little more clearly. You can also find a link to download the library in the video description. But now, back to our library here. To define a variable, it's best to go to the class in which you want to use this variable. In this example, I'll open the remote form, Form 1, and then go to the method editor here. At the top, we see this table. It's very important to understand that this tab bar here also belongs to the table and filters it according to the selected scope. Scope? Yes, we have now arrived at the point where we have to decide which scope we want for our variable. And as we can see here, there are the task, class, instance, local, and parameter scopes. However, the last tab, documentation, has nothing to do with the variables, so we'll leave it out for now. Task variables are similar to session variables. A task is effectively a user session. The values of these variables can therefore also be used by the user in every area of the application. This also means that these variables are valid and available as long as the session is open. If the session is closed, the user closes the application, the user's task variables and their contents are also lost. Class variables are, as the name suggests, variables of a class, and every instance created by this class can access these variables. This means that the values or variables are cross-user, or rather cross-task. If an instance of the same class is created for another user, this instance can also access the same class variables. For example, if both users open the remote form, Form 1, then both of them access the same class variables. If one user changes the value of a class variable, the other user will also see this. And even if the application is not open by any user, the value remains saved in the class. Instance variables are similar to class variables. The only difference is that they are not cross-user. They are only available in the respective instance. In the case of Form 1, this means that if I define an instance variable, every user who opens Form 1 has their own version or representation of the definition as a variable, and each user can save their own values. However, as the variable is linked to the instance, it is also destroyed when the instance is closed. Then we have the local variables. These are always only valid and available for the method in which they are defined, and only when the method is executed. Once the method has run, its local variables are no longer available. And finally, there are the parameters. But these are basically just local variables that allow values to be taken as arguments when the method is called. But we will take a closer look at this in a later video. Well, this was all pretty theoretical and introduced a lot of new terms. So let's take a closer look at an example. But before that, I would like to briefly show you how to define a variable. To define a variable, go to the top of this table. You can ignore the existing variables for now and click on a new empty row. The first thing required here is variable name. In the Omnis world, the first letter typically denotes the scope of the variable. So T for task, C for class, I for instance, L for local, and P for parameter. So if we now actually want to create an instance variable with the name testvar, We call it iTestVar in Omnis. And when we then leave the field here with tab, or simply by clicking somewhere else, the variable is defined by default as character. We will explain what this actually means and what the other items are in the next video. But now let's look at our sample. I have already created a few variables here. Under task, we can see a task variable called iTaskVariable. Under class, CClass variable, and under instance, iInstanceVariable, and a few other instance variables, but I will only use these so that we can display the task and class variables. We already learned that within the design editor, we can only use instance variables. I'll spare you the simple code on how to load the values into the instance variables at this point. As I said, you can also download the demo library. Okay, I will now test the form. Here we can see an option to set a value for each type of variable and a button to load any existing values. I can't display local variables such as parameters here, as these are only available within methods and not in the entire instance. But we'll take a look at that in a moment. So, I press Load, and we don't see anything yet. Perfect, because we haven't set any values yet. So, I'll now set a value for each variable. Here for task, simply task. For class, class. And for instance, instance. And we can see straight away that the values have been accepted. And now it gets really interesting. I open the application again in a new tab to simulate a second user and press Load here. We see exactly what I explained before, namely that the class variable is also available here with the same value. If I now change this to global, for example, and go to the first tab and press Load here, we can see that the value of the class variable has changed again here. And we have now also seen that the second user could not access any of our other variables. However, if I now, as user 1, that's how I call the first tab, change the instance but not the task by pressing the Change Form button here, we can now also see Form 2 at the top here, and now click on Load. Please note that we can still access the value of the task variable, but no longer the class variable, for example. This is because we are now in an instance of the class Form 2 and no longer Form 1. And as it is therefore also a different instance, we can no longer access the instance variable. Also, we can no longer access the former instance variables if we switch back to Form 1, the former, as these were also destroyed when Form 1 was closed. The last thing I want to show you briefly is how I have used a local variable, for example. To do this, I go back to the editor of Form 1 and there to the $event method of the Change Form button. And here we now see this variable highlighted in blue. I've used it here just as a placeholder for the name of the remote form that should be changed to when the button is clicked. Nothing too exciting. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Now you know a lot about the scopes in Omnis Studio. As I said, next time we'll take a look at the different types of variables, such as character or integer. So stay tuned. See you soon. Take care.